Okay, so are you one of the millions, literally millions, who got completely drawn into Colleen Hoover's It Ends With Us?
It's hard not to have heard of it, right? It's everywhere.
Exactly. But what if exploring that really powerful story, the one that brings up so many feelings, could also be like a surprisingly good way to boost your English?
That's an interesting thought. Using something you're already engaged with emotionally as a learning tool. I like it.
Yeah. So for this deep dive, we're really going to get into how that emotional journey in the book, plus all the podcast discussions it sparked, can seriously level up your English reading and listening skills.
Okay, so we're talking finding the right podcasts, some actual techniques to use.
Right. And, what kind of English you actually pick up when you listen to people talking about these quite complex themes in the book.
Makes sense. So where do we start? Why this book? It Ends With Us, specifically for learning English.
Good question. Let's unpack that.
Well, obviously it's hugely popular, which we mentioned, but beyond that.
I think it's the relatability, isn't it? Even though the situations get intense.
Definitely. The core emotions, love, confusion, fear, strength, they're things people connect with. And the dialogue, a lot of it feels like how people might actually talk.
Yeah, even when they're discussing really hard things, relationships, choices, conflict. Yeah. It makes the language feel, relevant right away.
Spot on. You invest in Lily and the other characters, and so the words they use, the situations they're in, it just sort of sticks more.
And that's where the learning gets really interesting, I think. Because the book tackles heavy stuff, toxic relationships, resilience, breaking cycles.
Right.
Listening to podcasts where people grapple with those same ideas. That helps you absorb vocabulary about feelings, opinions, social issues.
In a really natural way. It's not like studying a list.
Exactly. It's in context. You hear how words like justify or volatile are used when talking about real, complicated human stuff.
Precisely. You're getting the words with the emotion, with the situation. That kind of learning is just, stickier, more effective.
Yeah, much more memorable than just flashcards.
For sure. And like we said, the book talk effect, its sheer popularity means there's just a ton of material out there. Reviews, analyses, book club chats.
So no shortage of listening practice.
Not at all. An almost endless supply for learners.
Okay, so there's tons of stuff out there. How do people actually find the good discussions? What should they search for?
Right, good point. You want to be kind of specific. Try things like It Ends With Us podcast, obviously.
Makes sense.
Or Colleen Hoover podcast. Maybe It Ends With Us book club. It Ends With Us analysis.
What about the characters?
Yeah, definitely. Like Lily Ryle Atlas discussion that can narrow it down to specific character analyses.
Okay, but here's a big one, right? Spoilers.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Huge warning here.
If you haven't finished the book, you really need to be careful.
Totally. Look really closely at the episode titles, the descriptions. See if they say spoiler-free or if they focus only on, say, the first half or a specific theme you've already read about.
Don't ruin the story for yourself.
Exactly. And when you're looking through those results, try to find podcasts that seem to dig a bit deeper.
Like
ones that talk about why characters do what they do, their motivations, or podcasts that handle the tough themes, respectfully, thoughtfully.
Right, not just glossing over them.
Yeah. Or maybe ones that compare it to the sequel. It Starts With Us, or the movie, if that's relevant by the time you're listening.
Okay, so you've navigated the spoiler minefield, found a promising podcast. Now what? How do you actually use the book and the podcast together to learn? What's the method?
Well, there are sort of two main ways you could go about it. It depends on what feels best for you.
Okay, option one.
Option one is read first. So you read a chunk of the book, maybe a few chapters.
And while reading?
Really focus on, Lily's feelings, what she's thinking. Pay attention to key conversations, those difficult moments.
Got it. And then what?
Then you find a podcast episode that talks about that specific part you just read.
And when listening to the podcast,
you listen for a few things. How do the hosts summarize what happened? Do they match your understanding?
Okay.
What specific words do they use to describe, say, Ryle's actions or Lily's dilemma? Jot those down.
Vocabulary focus.
Exactly. And listen to how they discuss the bigger themes in that section, like the cycle of abuse or her conflicting feelings.
Right. Connecting the plot points to the deeper meaning. That makes sense. Checks your understanding, too.
It does, and expands your vocabulary right there in context.
Okay, what's option two?
Option two is basically the reverse. Listen first.
So hear about it before reading it.
Yeah. Find a podcast segment that summarizes or analyzes a part of the book you haven't read yet. It gives you a bit of context, maybe some things to look out for.
Like a primer.
Kind of.
Okay.
Then you go read that section in the book.
And what are you looking for in the book then?
You look for the specific scenes the podcast mentioned. You try to find the exact dialogue that shows character, the stuff the host pointed out.
Ah, connecting the analysis back to the text.
Exactly, and you pay attention to how their author, Colleen Hoover, actually portrays the emotions they discussed. Does the writing match the podcast analysis? How does she show it?
So it's like this active back and forth between listening and reading.
Precisely. Really engages you. And a practical tip for either method?
Yeah.
Keep a notebook handy or a file on your computer, whatever works.
A what?
For jotting stuff down. New words from the book like vulnerable, justify, volatile, resilience. Those are key in this story.
Mm-hmm.
And also phrases from the podcast. Discussion phrases.
Like?
Things like, on one hand, but on the other hand, useful for contrasts. Or, what struck me most was, for emphasis. Maybe I found it problematic when, for critique. Or it really highlights the theme of for analysis.
So language for having the discussion, not just understanding the story.
Exactly. Really valuable for expressing your own thoughts in English later.
These are great practical tips. Could we maybe walk through an example, focus on a character or theme?
Absolutely. Let's take Ryle. He's,
Right.
well, a very complex character.
Definitely evokes strong reactions. Podcasts must talk about him a lot.
Oh, constantly. And hearing how they discuss him, the language they use to analyze his actions, that's where the learning comes in.
Okay, so if you're listening to a discussion about Ryle, what should you tune into?
Listen for how they handle the contrast, his charm versus his anger.
Right, the two sides.
They might say something like, he's presented as super charismatic, but highlighting that contrast. Or you can see how Lily might rationalize his behavior early on, explaining her perspective.
Mm-hmm. Trying to understand her viewpoint.
Or maybe listeners often feel conflicted about Ryle because acknowledging the complexity. And listen for analysis words. Let's delve into the reasons for his volatility.
Those phrases really show how to talk about complicated characters. So after hearing that, back to the book.
Yep. Go back to the text and actively look for scenes showing both sides. Where is he charming? Where does the anger show? And notice Hoover's specific word choices. How does she write charisma? How does she describe the anger and its effect?
It makes reading much more active, doesn't it? Hunting for the evidence.
Exactly. You're not just reading, you're analyzing alongside the podcasters.
Got another quick example.
Sure. Think about Lily's flashbacks with Atlas.
Ah, yeah, those are important.
Super important. They give so much context. So in podcasts, listen for phrases like, this provides crucial backstory, or it contrasts sharply with her present.
Explaining their function in the story.
Right. Or maybe this foreshadows future events. Listen for those kinds of analytical terms about narrative structure and emotional impact.
So you're learning vocab, but also how to talk about literature in English.
That's a huge part of it. Deeper comprehension, better discussion skills.
Okay. Any other tips specifically for using It Ends With Us to learn English, given what the book is about?
Yeah, a couple more things. Because it's so emotional, really focus on the emotional vocabulary.
How the book describes feelings.
Both the book and the podcasts. How do they talk about love, fear, confusion, anger, strength, sadness? Notice the different shades of meaning. That'll really enrich your own emotional expression in English.
Good point. The feelings are central.
Also, this book, it divides people. People have strong opinions.
Oh, for sure.
So pay attention to the language of debate and opinion in the podcasts. How do hosts agree? How do they disagree politely, especially on sensitive stuff? How do they justify their points?
Learning how to argue constructively.
Exactly. It's a goldmine for learning how native speakers discuss tricky subjects thoughtfully. You'll hear phrases for agreement, disagreement, explaining your reasoning.
Super useful for real-world conversations.
Definitely. And another practical tip,
Yeah.
if a podcast has a transcript, use it.
Read along while listening.
Yeah. It helps catch every word, especially when they're getting into complex motivations or themes. Really good for nailing down phrasing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Anything else?
One last exercise. After listening to a host make a point, say, about Lily's final decision, try to summarize their argument out loud, just to yourself, or write it down.
Why?
It forces you to really process what they said and articulate it yourself. Great for checking comprehension and practicing structuring an argument in English.
These are all really solid, actionable tips. So just to kind of wrap it up,
Yeah.
combining this really powerful emotional story, it ends with us, with all these insightful podcast discussions. It's just a fantastic way to immerse yourself in real English, right?
Absolutely. You get the language, you get the deep understanding of complex themes, you expand your vocabulary, all tied to something you're already invested in.
It makes learning feel less like work and more like discovery.
Exactly. Harnessing that engagement to boost your skills. It's smart learning.
So now we want to hear from you listening in. Have you read It Ends With Us?
What hit you the hardest? What part was maybe the most
I mean,
challenging?
have you found any great podcasts talking about
Sure.
any recommendations?
Yeah, share your thoughts and finds with us. Drop them in the comments below. We'd love to see what you think.